Okay, today we're doing the water resources notes. Talking all about how water exists on the planet, how we use it, all the fun stuff, similar to what we've been doing. We've been talking about all our natural resources. So first, one of the only ways that we get food is through water. This graphic is just showing you how many liters of water are required in order to create any one of these things. So it's saying for one egg you need 217 liters of water. For potato, 255. For 1 kilogram of potato. For 1 kilogram of maize, which is corn, 909 liters of water. 1 kilogram of wheat, 1,334 liters of water. So on and so forth. And then you look at your cows, 1 kilogram of beef, and you have 15,497 liters of water. So on the earth, we have a specific water budget. So only about 3% of the water that's on the planet is actually fresh water. The other 97% is the salt water that's in the oceans. If you break down that 3% of fresh water, then what you have is this 69% that of that fresh water is actually held in the polar ice caps and in the glaciers. Then we have another 30% that is in our groundwater, and the remaining 1% is what's in lakes, rivers, and swamps and within the atmosphere. We take our water, out of the water table that's contained within the groundwater. So how that actually looks if we break it down differently, here's all of the water that's on the planet. Total water that's there. You've got stuff that's in your oceans, and then there's a little line here that's like your saline lakes, and then there's another little one, it's kind of pink color, that's the saline groundwater, and then the very tip top, that blue, is fresh water. If I take that and expand that fresh water, this is how it actually looks, and you have 68% that's in your glaciers and ice caps, 30% that's in the ground, and then your other surface water here at the top. And then again, you could take that other surface water here at the top and expand it some more, and you see 73% is in the ice and snow, 20% is in your lakes, and so then we have soil moisture and swamps and rivers and biological water and atmospheric water at the very top. So how do we actually use it? Domestic fresh water, right? The water we need to live off of, the stuff we drink, the stuff we wash our clothes and clean our house with. It also gets used as irrigation for fields to grow the food that we need. It's used in industry, whether in manufacturing, mining, agriculture, whatever the situation is. We harness it to do hydroelectric power with dams, and we're going to spend a little time on that in the coming weeks. And we also use it for transportation by carrying ships across the rivers and lakes, and at the boundaries. It creates boundaries for us. Sometimes a river is the boundary between two states. It can be the boundary, river or lake, whatever the situation is, between two nations. Alright. So 70% of our water usage actually gets taken up in agriculture, 15% for industry, 15% for household. So a lot of our agriculture, or a lot of our water use is just to create the food that we need to eat, used by the farmers. So some of our problems that we have because of how we use our fresh water is that there's low water levels in the rivers and streams and lakes. It slows down the water flow because there's not as much water there. Our underground aquifers, so that's like a water storage area that's naturally underground, gets exhausted, it gets dried up. Because of irrigation, a lot of water is evaporated before it actually gets used. Fertilizers and pesticides and other industry pollutants go into the runoff into streams and lakes, and that hurts the wildlife there. And the industries will release warm water into the rivers, and that causes the dissolved oxygen that's in the water to decrease. because warm water has less oxygen, so then that's harmful to the wildlife that lives there as well. So some solutions that we can have to help reduce that, just you making some changes on your own. Obviously, we affect a small percentage of the water use across the world, but if you start working for changes, then it can move into these other areas. So starting with, you take shorter showers, you don't wash your car as much, you make sure you turn off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth, any little thing you can do to try to save water and not waste it. And then, changing irrigation, use drought resistant crops or use closed pipes instead of open canals for irrigation. And this is part of where you can kind of make yourself part of the fight against how current practices are to try to do different, make changes, make new laws that actually will be better, that it has to be closed pipes for irrigation. You can reduce farming contamination by reducing the use of pesticides and fertilizers. And again, those are really important things. Just because they are harmful to us, they still get into the foods that grow or into the cows that eat the wheat and the hay. And then it also actually affects the bees because it's in the flowers and when they're pollinating, and then that's part of why the bees are dying. So that's part of things that you could fight and be a part of the change for, even though you might not be a farmer yourself, you can sign petitions to try to make changes. And then we can force industry to remove pollutants from their wastewater as well, to make them take the time to actually clean things up so that they're not hurting the environment. So this is an example case study on the Colorado River. So it's an overtapped resource. It's 1,429 miles long, going through 7 United States. It supplies water and electricity to about 30 million people in the United States and Mexico. It's heavily dammed for the electricity and for agriculture. So it's got 14 dams on it. So it's basically one dam every 100 miles. 80% of it's used for irrigation and for cattle ranching. Downstream in Mexico, it can actually dry up completely, causing a lot of droughts for them. And it also makes salinity problems, so that's where there's salts and other things dissolved into it. And it prevents irrigation in Mexico. And the dried river causes a loss of biodiversity. All the plants and animals kind of either die off or have to move to a new location to find their water source. All right, so again, here's our Colorado River Basin. Starts up here, and it goes down through here. You can see some of the dams that are on it. There's also aqueducts or canals, and it runs right on through. Hoover Dam's a real big one. This is actually the river that creates the Grand Canyon, so if that helps understand a little bit. All these little tributaries run off of it, so if it goes down, these tributaries dry up. If the water level on the Colorado River goes down, these little rivers and tributaries dry up. Another aerial view. This is the Glen Canyon Dam across the Colorado River. It creates Lake Powell. So there's not actually supposed to be a lake there. It's just how it's overflowed from putting up the dam and blocking the river. All right, so another closer look at that overtapped Colorado River Basin. The current rate of river withdrawal is not sustainable. If it's not sustainable, it means that we can't keep doing it. It's going to run out. So much of the water is used for agriculture. Much of the water used for agriculture that is inefficient with water use is being used for cotton, alfalfa, and rice. The water used is subsidized by the government. Right. So then the reservoirs, there's places where water gets put into a reservoir and they will leak water into the ground below. You lose as much water or a lot of water through evaporation. It gets filled up with the silt of the river, depriving the delta. And it could eventually lose the ability to store water and create electricity. So those reservoirs that are created by the dams. And the states must conserve water, control population, and slow urban development to make this work. So our water shortages are going to grow. There's dry climates. It's going to lead to drought. Too many people are using a normal supply of water. There's wasteful use of water. 30% of Earth's land area experiences severe drought because of how we're using the water and redistributing it from how it existed naturally. And there's potential conflicts and wars over the water, refugees from the arid lands, and there's an increased mortality rate because there's not enough water. And like Los Angeles, they bring their water in from a very long way away because they don't have like a fresh water supply near them to make it all work. So the red is areas with highly likely conflict potential over the water. Orange is substantial conflict potential. Green is a moderate conflict potential. And in the blue, there are unmet rural water needs. So they have water needs that are not being met in those areas. Here, natural capital degradation, stress on the world's major river basins. Again, you can see this infographic. The place where we have overused the water, redistributed it in an unnatural way, whatever the case may be. The red is the areas that have high stress, and then moderate to little to no stress in the green and the white. These are areas that were already kind of desert-like anyway, and then we've made it worse. The way we redistribute the water from how it flows naturally is part of the problem, the dams. So the question is extracting the groundwater the answer? Groundwater is being withdrawn faster than it is being replenished. Most aquifers are replenishable, but you have to give them time. Aquifers provide drinking water for half of the world. The water tables are falling in many parts of the world, primarily from crop irrigation. So, no, extracting the groundwater is not the answer. Water is a replenishable resource. India, China, and the United States are the 3 largest grain producers, using the most water of all. They're overpumping the aquifers for irrigation of crops. Small farmers are drilling tube wells, and it has an effect on the water table, lowering it entirely. And in Saudi Arabia, aquifer depletion for irrigation as well. So when we do this, we're creating a problem, lowering the water table, and creating the droughts and the dryness. You guys have studied the Dust Bowl. You understand what happens when there's not enough water. Some of our trade-offs of the withdrawing the groundwater is an advantage. We have it's useful for drinking and for irrigation. The disadvantage, aquifer depletion from overpumping. It exists almost everywhere as an advantage, but a disadvantage is the sinking of land from overpumping. It will be renewable if it is not pumped or contaminated, but there's pollution in the last few decades because of our habits. It's cheaper to extract than most surface water, but deeper wells are non-renewable. So is building a dam an answer? The main goal of a dam and reservoir system is to capture and store the runoff, release the runoff as needed to control flood, generate electricity, supply irrigation, and for recreation. But while it reduces flooding and there's zero emissions electricity production, it displaces people when the reservoir fills up and floods. It impairs the ecological services of the river, and there's loss of plant and animal species, and can cause other streams and lakes to dry up. You affect the whole entire system by putting in one dam, and it makes it unhealthy over time. Alright, so when you do your notes, you're going to want to study this infographic. Advantages on the left, disadvantages on the right. Alright, so there's a case study where you can read about is whether or not the irrigation is the answer. But again, we're talking about declining the fish population. There's water pollution. It changes everything over time. And removing the salt from the seawater is a very hard and expensive process. There's people and places trying to do it, but you can't. I'll do